Okay, everyone. Welcome to Facilitating Feedback. This is a new that we're doing through the Overworking Designers and also through the Fountain Institute. So however you found it, I'm really happy that you're here. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about facilitating feedback, and who we have here to talk about that is Hannah Baker. So Hannah Baker, she's worked in visual education for around 15 years. She holds a BFA from MICA and a master's in art education from the University of Texas. She has facilitated countless participatory museum learning activities. And she did her master's research, her thesis research on visual thinking strategies, which is something she's going to talk about a little bit today. She did that with the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. And then recently, Hannah started a design studio here in Berlin. We're coming to you live from Berlin, by the way. She helps small businesses launch their brands through visual consulting and website design. And I really love talking through her kind of professional profile because we've been friends for at least 10 years or more. Yeah. So I'm happy to introduce Hannah Baker. And as she's talking, feel free to leave questions in the chat, anything you think of, any thoughts. She probably won't be able to see that in a moment, but I'll be watching it and I can respond. And then at the end of the talk, we can do a little bit of a Q&A. So I'll let Hannah take it away.
Can everybody hear me? I'm going to ask Jeff to give me a thumbs up if people can hear me.
I think it was worse earlier when I needed to mute, but I think it's good.
Yeah? Okay. Well, I'm just going to start.
Garo, does it sound better now?
Okay, cool. So today we are talking about facilitating feedback. So two big issues that a lot of designers are thinking about are facilitation, facilitating in workshop, facilitating in meetings, and then also feedback. So how do we get constructive feedback? So first, we're going to kind of think about like, why is facilitating good for your career? So some things that you might think about are it's putting you in a position of leadership. You're able to help other people understand design more and include them in the design process. It's also kind of a more senior, like it's showing your senior colleagues the capabilities that you have, but also good facilitation just creates good conversation and it activates the learning experience. So it activates this area that you want to kind of create ideas into. And the other thing is like, why is it so hard to get constructive feedback? A lot of times when we're getting feedback, we might hear things like, I don't like that, or make this look this one way, but we don't know why. And the two things that these two ideas have in common is the way that we can actually construct and build conversations and questions around these ideas to help us get better feedback is what good facilitation is. And so before I did design and before I did work with the Fountain Institute, I was actually a museum educator and art educator for many years. And the kind of principle behind that, for me at least, was this idea of participatory learning or active learning. So I'm going to kind of bring in some of the things that I learned in that field and that I think help me with this field now, today. So we're, as I said, going to steal something from the art world. Many industry have done this. Design industry steals from the art world all the time, and there's no reason to not do it again. So one of the things that I think I want to talk about is a little bit of a theory behind visual learning. So visual perception is visual thought. So this idea that the way that we look and see the world is actually thought within itself. So it's kind of divided from the idea of language. And Rudolf Arnheim is a German psychologist that did a lot of research in this area where there's the connection between the two. And then also another psychologist that I think really backs us up is Blavatsky, which had this idea of you have thoughts, so internal thoughts that you're thinking about, and then language of speaking out loud. And when these two overlap, so you can see, I want to see if I can do this. Hold on. Sure. No, never mind. I'm sorry. I'm trying to use this app, but I'm too. whatever, we'll keep going. So when the two overlap, you have verbal thought. So you have these ideas in the back of your mind, you say things out loud, and the concept of the idea of the thought happens by speaking out loud, which I think is a really important aspect. And that's one of the things of why facilitation is really important in a group, is because you need to get these words out of your head. You need to have these conversations with people to really form them as thoughts. And so this leads into like, why should we talk out loud? And within that, a lot of people are uncomfortable, especially when you're talking about a visual idea or visual artifact. People are uncomfortable with talking about the ideas and these constructs out loud, which is okay. And there's ways to kind of move around this and move past it as well. I think that one of the theories that I'm going to get into, or like it's a pedagogy, but also it's called aesthetic development by Abigail Housen. She did stages of aesthetic development. So she looked at how people actually look at visuals, how they look at art, and how they learn from it. And so there are 5 stages, but we're only going to talk about stages 1 and 2 today, where the majority of society is actually at stage 1 or 2. So in stage 1, we're going to take a look at these 2 painting, or the same painting of Picasso. And in stage 1, so in this first one, if somebody is in stage 1, they might look at it and say, I see 2 ladies holding each other, or the wallpaper is beautiful. So they're creating these narratives and these structures around their own personal lives. So it's really easy for people to kind of build in and see a narrative in a visual, because it's a way for them to connect it to their personal lives. And then if somebody moves beyond that to stage 2, they kind of be able to construct this idea in society more. So they might be able to relate it to themselves and to the world around them. So in the same painting in stage 2, somebody might say, oh, they have 5 fingers just like us. Or the hair on the first person is blonde, but the other person has a purple face, and that's not right. So that's weird. So anything that's kind of like out of their comfort zone or out of like what reality is, they might think is weird or strange. And so this is just kind of a good way to think about like where people are when they're thinking about and looking at visual ideas or visual artifacts. And the biggest thing I think I can take away from that is that 1 is they want to relate it to their personal life and society, and 2 is they want to create a narrative or story from it. And so the stages of aesthetic development are actually the basis for visual thinking strategies, which is what I really want to talk about today. So visual thinking strategies started off at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in the 1980s as a way for people to learn about art. But very quickly, they realized that it could be used not just as a way to learn about art, but to be able to build critical thinking skills and to build like empathy for one another and empathy for the group. And so this quickly transitioned to curriculums and pedagogies. So it moved outside of the museum into schools, into curriculums, but then even today, 30 years later, they're actually building it in businesses as well. And so it's based off of sense making and inquiry. The information is built together as a group. So it's a group activity. It's built off of facilitation. So one person, the leader, quote unquote, is a facilitator, and they are just facilitating the conversation with the group around a visual, and they're not disseminating this information on the group. So it's beyond a lecture based. And I think the best way to actually kind of talk about this is to show you a quick video of it in action. And the guy who you're going to be seeing in this video is actually Philip Yenawine, who is one of, him and Abigail Housen were the 2 people who initiated this theory. So we'll start off with that. I'm just gonna make sure my volume is up so you can hear this.
Some of you haven't had a chance to do so already, but is to look at this for just a minute or 2 in silence. What's going on in this picture? Yes.
It looks as though people aren't in an art gallery. Some are there walking around, observing the paintings, some are receiving instructions, some are perhaps copying some of the paintings that are on the walls.
Can I just stop you for a second? Let me just ask you, what do you see that makes you think someone's receiving instruction or something?
Well, I'm thinking perhaps this man who is leaning over the woman who is sitting. I mean, he may be giving her instruction, he may be simply observing her, but he has his hand over her shoulder, so maybe he's pointing out something to her that she may need to do or pay attention to.
Okay, good. So the way he's leaning, the way he's attending to what she's doing, and the way
of the hand toward the canvas that she has and that she's holding.
So you think that maybe he is offering some instruction to her.
Yes.
You said maybe someone was copying something? What did you see that made you say
the
that?
man in the left-hand side seated, yes, it looks as though he may be copying one of the paintings. Although for right now I can't tell which one, maybe he's filling in the background, yes.
Okay, good. So you think that maybe he is, in fact, sort of painting something, but you're not quite sure what he's thinking.
Exactly.
But the fact that he's sitting there looking like he's painting, he might be copying something that he's watching. Okay, great. What more can we find? Yes.
I think it's an art class because their portfolios leaned up against the wall.
Okay, so the whole thing might be a class, and the instruction. Some of you haven't had.
Okay, so there we go. So that's a quick example of what VTS is, and now I'm going to kind of break down what you guys saw a little bit more. So visual thinking strategies is based, as I said, it's a facilitated conversation, and it's based off of 3 main questions. What's going on in this image? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can we find? And so if you noticed in the beginning of the video, Philip gave everyone some time to kind of look at the image, silent observing, so they could take in everything that was happening. And then he opened up to the group what's going on in this image. And then somebody started to have a conversation and say what they thought was going on. And as they were doing this, he was pointing to the different areas, connecting to what the person was saying. And then from there, what the facilitator does is paraphrase what the viewer is saying. And when you have adults, like sometimes you do have to stop them, and they will a lot of times like give evidence for what they're thinking, but you want to break down and ask a little bit more in detail. So what do you see that makes you say that ... So you don't want to just say that. It's like, what do you see that makes you say that somebody was copying a painting? And then you ask, and then the original person who gave the information has a chance then to defend kind of their thoughts with more visual cues. And so then there you're building these critical thinking skills. But what you might have also noticed is that he's using conditional language. So he's never agreeing or disagreeing with a participant. And he's saying this could be this, or this might have been this, and you're not saying something's good or bad. You're just kind of allowing the thoughts to kind of sit in the air. And then you paraphrase again, and then you open it back up to the group. So what more can we find? And the conversations can tend to last 15 to 20 minutes, and I just wanted to give you a quick taste of it. But what you didn't see is when more people bring in different ideas, what the facilitator does is connect similar ideas and different ideas. So he might have said, oh, I see that you might have agreed with previous person's idea that this is somebody copying a piece of art, or you have a different idea than this other person. And you're letting everyone kind of have their own ideas and like constructions of the painting or the visual that you're looking at, but you're making sure that you're kind of leaving space for people to create their own ideas. And so, yeah, so these are some of the points that I wanted to point out of like what about like the VTS experience is really good as a facilitator is the paraphrasing with conditional language, pointing to areas that you're discussed, which I think is really important as well, because you don't always like make sure that everyone's on the same page. So the visual cue of you pointing to the area, make sure that we're all seeing it together, linking, contrasting, and complementary comments, and also being able to stay in that awkward pause. You didn't see that so much in this video, but a lot of times, like being able to sit in that silence and allowing people to think a little bit longer is really important. And some of the really good outcomes that have come from this, and as Jeff mentioned, this is what I did my thesis research on. So I did like 2 years of work with this. And in a lot of different cases, you see that people are more actively involved in conversation if you're able to have this type of facilitated conversation. Working in a group can build knowledge together, which is super important. The other thing that's really interesting about this is it actually gives voices to people who don't normally talk. So over and over and over again, you see people who don't speak up in group conversations feel this as a safe space for them to actually open up in conversation. The more people do VTS as a group, the more proficient they are, so the more comfortable and like the different areas you can move out from. So as I said, it started out with art in the visual world, but it's moved into science, using it in science museums, and using it in the classroom with literature and reading and writing, but also they're doing it with business consulting now and doing it for a variety of different topics and ideas. So it's just this, like, the idea of this facilitated conversation is great, but when you can start off in the visual sometimes and then build out to these other ideas. Yeah. And so the idea from this also that I want to take into into facilitation in your practice, in your working life, is that it's also really important to understand how to build and construct the right question. So what could I do better? Thinking about not just building an idea and topics for yourself, but also thinking about how we're going to kind of transition now into how we can build this into the feedback too. How can we get better feedback from what we just learned with VTS? But we also have to understand about, like, how do we ask the right questions? VTS is simple because you have these 3 questions you can ask from, but you're not gonna, that's how the curriculum is built for that. But like when you use it in your real life, you're not gonna always stick to these 3 questions. So some things to think about is, like, are you letting the conversation flow, or do you want to steer it? And there's not a good or bad for either one, but you do want to think about which of those you want to do. Making sure you're always using open-ended conversations or open-ended questions, because in that sense, you are letting people contribute and come up with their own ideas and participate in the conversation. Keeping it simple. Don't pack more than 1 question into a question. I do this all the time. I always ask like 3 or 4 questions at once, and then somebody's not sure how to answer them. So again, like, you just have to practice these things. And then the last thing is also like active listening, because listening is just as important as the questions that you're asking. And so that then brings us again into this feedback. So feedback is a 2-way street. I like to remind that to people. It's about the idea of, are you giving feedback or are you receiving feedback? And I think there's ways for us to think about how we can do both better. When we're thinking about receiving feedback, so when we're presenting our work and we're wanting people to get responses to it, we need to make sure we let them know what the goal of the feedback session is. So are you curious or want to know information about what is it about the design process, or what is it about the work that you're presenting that you want feedback on? The other is stating the goal of what the design was, so that everyone's kind of on the same page there. You also need to, like, with stating the goal, you have to provide context to, like, what the design process was, how you got there, what you're moving through. And so that you're kind of setting the stage for the people who are providing the information for you. Because if you just come into the conversation or come into the feedback session and you're talking about how you, like, can I just have some feedback on this? If they don't know what aspect of it that you're interested in or want responses from, then then you're not going to get what you need. Sorry, my dog is very much giving me the stink eye right now. But yeah, so that's about receiving. And then if we're thinking about giving, if we are wanting to give good feedback, then we can model it for other people. So if we are in a conversation and you're giving feedback about somebody else, it's always great to model what you might want in exchange of that. And there's actually, this is simplified from the Feldman's method, which is a critique method that we used in my art school, but I've also used throughout my career and use when I'm working with clients today. So the simplified version of it in my mind is describe what you're seeing, be objective. So when you're looking at something and you're thinking about what you're going to give feedback about, start really objectively. Start out with what it is that like you're looking at. Like describe it with what you're seeing, and then from there you want to connect what you're seeing and how it's being organized. And in this sense, you're still being pretty objective. You're not bringing in your own ideas yet. And then after that, you can start to kind of connect and think about where are these concepts. So I've described this thing, I've connected these different objects together, and now I'm thinking about what is this like, how does this sit in society? How is it fitting within the larger structure? And here you can start to be like a slightly subjective, but you always want to use evidence to back up what your thoughts are here. And the same with the final thing. And finally, you can bring in how you feel or think about the situation. Do you think it's effective? It's not effective? Do you like it or do you not like it? But you're also supporting that with evidence. And because you've described what it is, you've connected it, you've thought about the context, when you actually say if you like it or dislike it or effective or not effective, then in that sense, it's not coming out of the blue. And the people know where to go from there. There's an action point that's happening afterwards, which I think is a really important part of thinking about how you can give feedback that then is an actionable outcome instead of just being like, I don't like this. And so one thing you might be asking yourself right now is, but I don't just create visuals, because a lot of designers don't just create visuals, and they create a lot of other things that we might need feedback from, or we might need conversations about. And so how can we take this aspect of it into different elements? And so here you see in this thing, we have the museum, the Guggenheim in the bottom, which where is all this coming from? So the Feldman's method and VTS, and I know I'm throwing out a lot of things at you at the moment, but those are all building out from what we learned in the art, or what I learned in the art world. But with VTS, you can very easily start to structure your questions differently. So instead of saying, what do you see that makes you say this? What did you read that makes you say this? Or what did, if you're having like a data wall of information in a feedback session, then you can say like, what are the elements of this that makes you say this other thing happened? And so you're able to kind of build them out in different ways. And then you can also think about how these facilitated conversations can really be helpful in not just feedback sessions, but in retrospects, in building out group dynamics to have this like comfortable atmosphere together as well. And I think, yeah, so I guess like I'm kind of ending it here a little bit earlier than I thought, but I'm kind of interested and curious to open up to the group of like, how can you imagine using these type of techniques in your job today? Yeah.
Yeah, can anyone think about how they might be using something they've learned, something about facilitating these questions, facilitating this conversation? Is there anything like this that you could consider adding into your work life? Feel free to type the questions into the chat. Kind of can answer anything that you have.
Yeah, and I know I went through that kind of fast. So if you guys have any more questions about the facilitation process or visual thinking strategies. Also, I think it's a really interesting thing to experience as a participant, and we all are a smaller group, and so we can also like hop into one of the air meet tables and do a facilitated conversation as well around work.
Okay, if there's no questions, then we're going to move into having the tables where you can talk about whatever you'd like. Hannah's also going to be going into the session, this is the table that's called Visual Thinking Strategy, which is what she just walked through, these 3 questions that you asked. I found that really personally helpful in my, UX UI design work. We had this conversation like about a year ago, and I brought it into kind of the group critique that I was having with the designers and my team at that point. So there's definitely some ways I think we can talk about getting that into just the kind of typical UX process, and also this really visual design world and all the artistic things. But yeah, that's something that we're happy to talk about with after. The way AirMeet works is you can jump into a table and you can have conversations with whoever you decide you want to jump into a table with. I wanted to thank Hannah for giving us her basically like 2 years of master's thesis into a 30-minute presentation, which I know can be difficult. And I thought it was really great how visual that presentation was. We're also going to be having a course coming up soon. So we're starting a course on Monday. It's called Advanced UX UI Design for the Real World. And there's a lot of information. I'd love to give it to you, but since it's going to be starting on Monday, if you're interested in it, go to the website. It's www.thefountaininstitute.com. I'll put the link here in the chat. Basically, we're going to need to get you to book a call sometime today or tomorrow if you're actually interested in the course. But if you go to the website, I'm going to put in the chat, you can take a look at the curriculum and see if it's something that makes sense for you. What we're really trying to do is provide some learning in this kind of area in your career that's in between like 0 to 4 years. So when you're working UX UI designer, there are a lot of challenges, and what we found in our UX research is that nobody supports you. So we designed a course specifically to get you from junior and mid to senior level. So a lot of the soft skills involved in getting your designs to launch into the real world and how to work with non-designers, as well as some UX research tips, skills, and some facilitation and presentation skills and tips. So me and Hannah have been working pretty hard on this course, so we're excited to have some people in it, and hopefully if you're interested, one of you tonight could join the course. So yeah, just go to the website and you can book an info call today, tomorrow at the latest, and we can maybe still consider you for the course on Monday. So thank you so much, Hannah, and now we're going to move to the tables.